beneath the hollowed, dust-laden halls of academia lies a buried truth about the very source of life. For centuries, a profound, unsettling insight into motherhood was deemed too dangerous, too subversive for the intellectual canon. It was a philosophical heresy that challenged the foundation of civilization's most sacred myth. This is the evolutionary finding on mothers that the dark heart of academia concealed, an idea whose time was ruthlessly suppressed. The institutional narrative of motherhood is one of pure, selfless devotion, a sentimental lie woven to serve a comfortable, patriarchal order. Yet, a colder, more truthful examination reveals a primordial conflict etched into existence itself. This is not a story of choice, but of a blind, universal will manifesting through the female of the species. A biological imperative of staggering power and strategic sacrifice that civilization has desperately romanticized to hide its terrifying implications. The maudlin portrayal of maternal affection, so ubiquitous in our art, our literature, and our daily discourse, is not a reflection of a simple biological truth, but rather a fragile and necessary artifice. It is a collective lie, meticulously constructed and vigorously maintained, to obscure the raw, terrifying, and purposive force of what can be understood as the will to life. This is not a matter of conscious deception by individuals, but rather an unconscious, species-level imperative to make palatable a reality that would otherwise be unbearable to confront. The will to life is not a gentle nurturer. It is a blind, insatiable, and relentless pressure that courses through all living beings. A fundamental striving that uses the individual, in this case the mother, as its primary and most potent vessel. Its sole aim is continuation, propagation, the endless and cyclical perpetuation of existence, and it operates with a ruthless, biological efficiency that stands in stark, brutal opposition to the curated narrative of sentimental tenderness. To understand the depth of this delusion, one must first strip away the layers of cultural varnish and observe the underlying metaphysical machinery. The mother, in her essential biological role, is the site of a profound and violent transaction. Her body is not merely her own. It becomes the battlefield and the resource for the new life it carries. From the moment of conception, a silent biochemical war is waged, a struggle for resources between her own individual existence and the new organism, which is, in its essence, a separate will demanding its own manifestation. This is not a harmonious symbiosis, but a negotiated truce, often at great cost to the host. The nausea, the profound fatigue, the radical alteration of her very physical form. These are not gentle side effects, but stark evidence of a fundamental, self-directed drive working through her. The romantic notion of a blissful pregnancy is a story told to sanitize this visceral, often grueling, process of one life being subsumed for the potential of another. This sanitization continues with the concept of selfless love. The devotion of a mother is held up as the pinnacle of human virtue, a pure and untainted altruism. Yet, a colder, more truthful examination reveals that this devotion is the brilliant, cunning strategy of the will to life itself. It is a biological and psychological imperative of such overwhelming power that it masquerades as a moral choice. The sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort, ambition, and even safety. These are not acts of rational, ethical decision-making in the face of a competing desire. They are, rather, the manifestation of a compulsion so deeply wired into her being that to resist it, it would be a form of psychological self-annihilation. The love she feels is the phenomenological experience of this compulsion, the way the individual consciousness interprets and justifies the dictates of the species. It feels like choice, like virtue, but its source is a deep, impersonal, and demanding force. To call it selfless is to misunderstand its nature. The self has been seamlessly co-opted by a larger, more powerful aim. Civilization, in its intricate and fragile structure, could not endure the naked truth of this dynamic. The entire edifice of human society, with its laws, its contracts, and its moral codes, is built upon the foundational unit of the family. And the family, in turn, is stabilized by this myth of the nurturing, ever patient, and intrinsically virtuous mother. If this veil were to be torn away, the terrifying reality would be exposed, that the core of this sacred institution is not gentle love, but a brutal, biological mandate. The mother is not a saint, but an instrument of a cosmic will that is utterly indifferent to her personal happiness, her ambitions, or her suffering. Recognizing this would unravel the moral justification for the immense sacrifices demanded of her. It would reveal the asymmetry of the arrangement, where the individual is used and expended for a purpose that is not her own. The sentimental narrative is the anesthesia that allows the procedure of perpetuation to continue without paralyzing existential dread or revolt. Furthermore, this delusion serves to manage the profound and unsettling power inherent in the maternal role. The mother holds the power of life and death, of nourishment and neglect. She is the first world the new being encounters, and her actions shape its fundamental orientation toward existence. This is a terrifying responsibility and an immense, primal power. By framing her actions within the context of sentimental love and innate virtue, society disarms this power. It transforms the potentially fearsome figure of the life giver, who operates according to deep, non-rational drives, into the comforting, predictable, and self-sacrificing figure of the mother. This containment makes her manageable within the patriarchal and social order. Her power is acknowledged, but only once it has been sanitized and placed within a safe, sentimental framework that denies its more terrifying, impersonal origins. The resistance to this truth is itself evidence of its potency. To suggest that maternal love is anything other than a pure and virtuous choice is met with outrage and moral condemnation. This outrage is the defense mechanism of the delusion, a reflexive protection of a narrative that is essential for psychological and social stability. We cling to the sentimental ideal because the alternative is a metaphysical abyss. It means acknowledging that at the very heart of human connection, in the bond we hold most sacred, lies a force that is not personal, not moral, and not concerned with our individual fates. The will to life, in its magnificent and terrible indifference, uses the mother as its most effective vehicle. And the story of selfless love is the gentle lie that makes this profound servitude not only bearable, but desirable. The veil is not merely decorative, it is a vital, existential necessity, allowing the individual to serve the brutal aims of eternity without being crushed by the knowledge of their own instrumental role in a process far greater and far less sentimental than themselves. To observe the mother is to witness a profound and unsettling spectacle, one that has been systematically misinterpreted through a lens of moral sentimentality. What is celebrated as selfless virtue is, in its naked reality, the sublime and indifferent genius of the species manifesting through a singular, temporary vessel. The mother is not an autonomous moral agent in her profound sacrifices and devotions. She is the primary instrument of a deeper, metaphysical cunning, a pawn in a game whose true scope transcends her individual consciousness and desires. This genius of the species, a blind, perpetual, and purposive will, operates with a strategic intelligence that far surpasses the rational calculations of any single mind. Its sole aim is the perpetuation of life, an aim it pursues with a ruthless and impersonal efficiency. The individual, in this grand and terrible design, is ultimately expendable, a temporary vehicle whose value is determined solely by its utility in serving this eternal cycle. The mother, as the locus of creation and primary nurturer, becomes the most potent and therefore the most subjugated expression of this will. Her body, her energies, her time, and her very consciousness are relentlessly opted and directed toward an end that is not her own, an end she experiences not as an external command, but as the most intimate and powerful of her own internal drives. This subordination is not a passive state, but an active, dynamic process of conquest. The genius of the species employs a masterful deception, one so complete that the instrument mistakes its own servitude for the pinnacle of personal fulfillment. The powerful, all-consuming love a mother feels for her child is the phenomenological mask worn by this biological imperative. It feels like the core of her individuality, her most profound and personal emotion. Yet it is precisely the mechanism by which her individuality is systematically dismantled and repurposed. Her personal ambitions, intellectual pursuits, and desires for leisure or solitary reflection are not merely set aside, they are often rendered psychologically insignificant in the face of this overwhelming compulsion to nurture and protect. This is the brilliance of the strategy. It does not feel like an external imposition. It feels like love. It feels like purpose. This internal experience is the very proof of its effectiveness, the surest sign that the individual will has been seamlessly annexed by the will of the species. The mother, in her devotion, believes she is acting for herself and her child, unaware that she is acting as the species for the species. The sacrifices she makes are therefore not moral triumphs to be celebrated, but biological and metaphysical necessities to be observed with a sober and unflinching eye. Her sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, the depletion of her physical resources, the surrender of her autonomy. These are not choices made from a position of free will where other, equally compelling options exist. They are the inevitable, preordained responses dictated by the genius of the species operating through her. To frame these actions as selfless is to fundamentally misunderstand their origin. The self has not willingly chosen to sacrifice itself for another. The self has been reconfigured so that the other's needs are perceived as its own. This is not altruism. It is a more sophisticated form of egoism, where the boundaries of the ego have been expanded by a primordial force to include the offspring. The species ensures its survival not by appealing to our reason or our moral sense, but by wiring us so that its survival becomes our deepest, most non-negotiable personal concern. The mother's exhaustion is not a badge of honor. It is the physical cost of being the conduit for a force that is indifferent to her fatigue. This dynamic reveals a terrifying asymmetry at the heart of existence. The mother, as the instrument, bears the full, brutal weight of the material and psychological burden. She is the one whose body is permanently altered, whose life trajectory is most radically redirected, whose identity is most completely absorbed by this role. The genius of the species, however, is utterly indifferent to this cost. It is concerned only with outcomes, with the successful weaning and raising of the new generation. The mother's suffering, her lost potential, her quiet despair. These are irrelevant data points in the grand calculus of biological continuation. This is the true darkness that the romantic narrative seeks to conceal. The mother is a means to an end. She is a resource, the most crucial one, to be consumed in the process. Her value is immense, but it is an instrumental value, not an intrinsic one. She is cherished and celebrated by society precisely to the degree that she fulfills this function, and her struggles are sanitized and sentimentalized to make this consumption more palatable, to prevent the instrument from questioning its fundamental purpose. Civilization, in its entirety, is built upon this silent, monumental sacrifice, and thus has a vested interest in maintaining the deception. The entire structure of society, from its most intimate family units to its broadest cultural norms, depends on the reliable, uncompensated labor of mothers. To acknowledge that this labor is not a freely given gift of love, but the manifestation of a blind, metaphysical will, would be to undermine the moral foundation of the social order. It would reveal that the bedrock of human culture is not virtue, but a sublime and ruthless biological strategy. Therefore, society must double down on the myth. It must adorn the mother with accolades of sainthood and selflessness, not to honor her, but to bind her more completely to her role. By framing her servitude as the highest moral achievement, it ensures her compliance and disguises the profound, existential violence of her instrumentalization. The genius of the species operates not only through biology, but through culture, and our most cherished sentimentalities are among its most effective tools for maintaining a system where the individual life is willingly, even joyfully, subordinated to the blind, perpetual, and impersonal aim of the will. The sentimental myth of motherhood is a fortress wall guarding us from a terrifying truth. We are all instruments of a blind, insatiable will. The mother is not a saint, but the primary vessel through which life's relentless engine consumes the individual for its own perpetual motion. To see beyond the veil is to confront the chilling genius of existence, a system built not on love, but on sublime, indifferent sacrifice. The darkness was hidden for a reason.